Hello. Cloud procurement, kind of a little bit different as a topic to talk about. Well, I'm Priya, and a part of what I do is talk about exciting stuff, not IoT, but procurement with customers across the Asia-Pacific and Japan region. And I'm part of an international team that covers UK, Canada, etc. So that's a lot of exciting global procurement stuff. So why are we talking about procurement today? Believe it or not, procurement is emerging as one of the biggest inhibitors of driving mission outcomes in the public sector when it comes to cloud. So that said, the procurement doesn't really want to be a blocker. They really want to make it work. However, what they struggle with is this shift in the way cloud really operates. So hopefully today's session would give some pointers around how to think about cloud procurement differently. So what we're going to cover today is I'll talk about some very fundamental things like what is cloud and therefore what bearing it has on cloud procurement. What are the key roles and responsibilities, how to buy cloud, some lessons and best practices from around the world that we've seen specifically to in the context of cloud procurement. So one of the biggest reasons procurement struggles today about getting their heads around how to do cloud procurement is because cloud is different in the way it is bought. Not so much, perhaps, in the way you would implement or use it. But from a procurement perspective, it's really a step change, right? So that said, let's talk about what really is different and what is cloud computing in the context of procurement again. So let me stress a few things here. We've heard about what cloud computing is, and hopefully all of you are pretty aware of the basics there. But let me talk about a few things there. So it is on demand. A few key things there, right? It's on demand. It is self-service. Requires no upfront costs. It requires no long-term contracts. And it is pay-as-you-go. Now compare that to what procurement is traditionally used to, right? On the cloud side, you talk about on-demand. Procurement traditionally has known how to do year-on-year, long-term kind of procurements, right? Data centers, outsourcing. They run 5 years, 10 years, and so on and so forth. They don't understand what on-demand really means. They also are used to having service providers that do everything for them, right? They are not used to the concept of self-service again. So traditional procurement is all about upfront commitment for X number of years and so on and so forth. Pay-as-you-go is really alien, etc. So these are some very, very fundamental differences in the way cloud operates and how procurement looks at it. And therefore, there are so many different challenges that procurement runs into. That said, from what we have seen across the globe with large governments and public sector organizations is that it's critical to get procurement right. We can't stress enough about the importance of getting this right. Procurement has to be front and center when it comes to your cloud journey. Not having them come on board is going to inevitably negate the benefits of cloud, right? It's the least glamorous, the least exciting part of the cloud journey, but it's critical, right? So let's look at what are the kind of benefits procurement can really hamper, right? So we all know about the fundamental benefits of cloud, of course, scalable and innovation and agile, costs and all of that. So let's talk about, for example, let me stress on a few things here. Imagine not being able to innovate or be agile just because you can't get technology easily or quickly enough, right? That's like Stone Age. You can't expect that to happen today, right? For example, imagine, again, millions of dollars locked up in upfront capacity that you have bought just because you don't know how to do on-demand and how to use on-demand pay-as-you-go pricing. It's just unacceptable to spend those millions of dollars in today's time. So again, let's revisit the definition of cloud in the context of procurement. So let's see if, I think there are a few fundamental questions, and there are not too many. If you get a few of these questions right, I think you'd be able to think about procurement a little differently. So the question to ask is, does your procurement, when you're planning to go out and buy cloud, does your procurement really let you do on demand, or is it still thinking about long-term contracts in 5 years, 3 years, with 5 different extensions of the contracts and so on and so forth? Does your procurement requirement or policy assume that there is going to be a service provider who does everything for you, or does it let you do things on your own, self-service? No long-term contracts. This really is my favorite when it comes to procurement. It's unthinkable, right? Really, with AWS, you just can start using us anytime you want and stop using us anytime. It's a little bit, it's a dichotomy. On one hand, when we see procurements, a lot of customers talk about ensuring that vendors are not they're not logged into vendors, and so on and so forth. And here we are, and we say, look, you don't need any long-term contracts, and they come back and say, okay, can you sign this 3-year deal with us? It's kind of a dichotomy, right? So that's the long-term contracts. And the final thing, of course, is, does your procurement understand how to utilize pay as you go? That's one of the, again, key shifts in the way cloud operates and how procurement needs to think, because you're moving from CapEx to an OpEx model. So a lot of budgeting cycles, etc., work from a CapEx perspective. So that's a little bit of awareness and education, and possibly re-engineering internal processes to get to something like a pay-as-you-go, right? So it's clear, of course, that there is this big gap. Let's try to understand why these gaps are and what can we do to address some of these gaps. To begin with, let me talk about a very fundamental confusion when it comes to cloud procurement, and that is, people cannot determine who the different players are in the ecosystem and who they are buying from, right? So in a cloud environment, you've got different players. You've got the AWS service provider, the pure play cloud service provider. We essentially provide the fundamental foundational building blocks. And then there are the systems integrators and the managed service providers and these resellers, etc., that build on these foundational cloud services. They provide you either an end-to-end solution, or they provide you value-added services, etc. So they are the second part of the entire ecosystem. Now, depending on what you are really buying, you may have the skills within your organization to just go and start spinning up instances, start using the foundational services by yourself. Maybe that's what you're looking at. Either that, or you're saying, I want a student's learning solution that needs to run on AWS Cloud. That's a completely different way of looking at what you want to buy. So depending on what you really want to buy, you decide whether you're engaging with the cloud service provider or you're engaging with the partner ecosystem. Now, where it becomes a problem is when the procurement requirements cannot distinguish between the two. So there are procurement requirements that are written with a broad brush that go across both the service providers, the cloud service provider spectrum, and the solution providers. So it's important to understand what you are buying, and therefore, where do you apportion risk, responsibility, accountability, etc. So that's the first point to consider. I'd like to, again, go back to one of the very commonly used analogies here of the utilities. So you've got, on one hand, you've got at the one extreme end, you've got the utilities providers that essentially generate electricity and so on and so forth. From that to when you have the consumers, it's a life cycle, and there are a lot of different players that are included there. right? So you've got the building contractors, you've got the electricians, you've got the designers who use, who would do the conduiting and then do the wiring and so on and so forth. And at the other end, you've got the consumers. Although you've got all of this, the consumer still needs to put the light bulbs, the aircon units, and still has to switch on the utilities for it to power the appliances in the house. The cloud ecosystem is very, very similar, right? So the AWS is very similar to pretty much the utility providers. Then we've got, like I said, we've got an ecosystem of solution providers who build on top of the core foundational services. And then there are government and public sector customers. Now, again, depending on what you are buying, for example, in the utilities, let me go back to the utilities example there. So you cannot expect the utility company to put light bulbs and aircon units in your house, nor can you have them liable if you caused a fire at home by plugging in an appliance in the wrong power socket, right? So you've got to think about the cloud ecosystem in a similar way. So when you talk about responsibilities and different kinds of players there, we spoke about the systems integrators and the managed solution providers, etc. What is important to know is the delivery model is different as well, right? So we spoke about different players. How these services are delivered is also very, very different, and that has a direct bearing on procurement. For example, when you're using AWS directly, you go into your own console, you spin up instances, you use whatever services you want. AWS does not even have the visibility of what your environment is, right? Unlike a service provider, a systems integrator, who perhaps is doing all the implementation for you, etc. So when requirements, things like you see your procurement requirements, like the bidder must provide acceptance tests. They must support our acceptance test, and they must do transition in and out services. These are very alien to us because we are not implementing or providing any service in that sense, because it's all self-service. Like I said, we don't even have visibility into what you're using. So these are, again, things to keep in mind. Another very typical thing that you come across in your procurement requirements is reporting. The bidder is required to provide weekly, monthly, annual, biannual kind of reports to us. Now, in a cloud context, it's all available to you by the minute at a click of a button within your management console. You can really see what is the utilization of your resources, how much you're spending, and all of that is available to you already. So when you write requirements like that, it's very difficult for us to fulfill those kinds of requirements because it's all self-service, right? Access and audit rights is my favorite. If I were to use, again, the utilities example, if I caused a fire in my house because I plugged in the appliance the wrong way, what use is it for me to go take a look at the power generators? What will it give me? It gives me nothing, absolutely, other than just waste of time, or maybe just marveling at the scale and everything that the electricity generator is. Other than that, it gives me nothing at all. So the cloud environment is very simple. AWS data centers are even, we don't even know where they are. They are in nondescript locations, and that's core to our security philosophy, right? So going in there, looking at some blinking lights, colorful cables, etc., gives you nothing, right? So compliance requires, in organizations, compliance requires that you must conduct audit. Absolutely fine. The question to ask, though, is what audit? What are you auditing? And where is that information available, right? So a lot of information, like I said, is available to you already within your management console. AWS Artifact is one of the services that you can use to even look at all our compliance reports online. Again, you can just go into consoles and see what ISO certifications and other certifications we've got. So they can be very readily available to you to go back to compliance with. Another favorite, pricing. The bidder shall provide firm fixed prices. When a requirement like this is written, it is one single biggest damage it can cause to the benefits of cloud. What happens is AWS, for example, has lowered prices 62 times now in the last 11 years. So you get none of those benefits when you ask for firm fixed price. There is also another significant collateral damage to a requirement like this, which is when you ask for firm fixed price, you get a frozen in time AWS service catalog. We've released over 1,000 new services features last year. That's like nearly 3 new features, 3 new things every day. So what you don't get is the benefit of all these new services and latest and the greatest that we bring on board, right? So that's another damage that we do. Now, those are the few key kind of gaps when it comes to procurement. We've spoken about what those gaps are. Now let's look at what are the different ways you can really buy AWS. There are essentially 3 ways all our customers buy, right? Either they buy us directly, or they buy us through partners, or they buy us through what is called as panel arrangements, the bulk tenders in Singapore, for example. Quick note on what these are. The direct engagements are typically one-on-one contracting between the customer and AWS. The indirect ones are essentially where a third party is signing the contracts with the customer. And we've got the panel arrangements. The panel arrangements are, and these are very, very popular in government, especially where, whether it's IDA 1242 bulk tender, which is currently running for cloud services, or the UKG cloud, or you've got the Australia Cloud Services panel. These are very popular mechanisms where the government, on behalf of all the government agencies, has a pre-negotiated contract with the cloud service providers, and you can use that. Right? So those are typically very popular as well. Again, some of these work really well, some of these don't work really well, because going back again to what procurement is really looking at is a broad brush, especially in these panel contracts. UKG Cloud, for example, has 2,000 plus service providers, cloud service providers. So it's not just the pure play cloud service providers, but a whole lot of other kind of providers as well who've signed up to the same kind of agreements and stuff. So it's a very broad brush, and it brings along its own challenges. To summarize there are 3 things really in summary that you need to ask when you're talking about cloud procurement. What are you buying? Are you buying building blocks, or are you trying to buy solutions or services from somebody else to manage, maintain your environment? Who will manage your environments? Do you have the skills within your organization? Can you run your own environment, so you need somebody else? And therefore, how are you buying? So if you're buying building blocks, you have the skills and you have the organization that can do it for you within your organization, then obviously you can go and engage directly with the cloud provider, or you will always need a partner to do this for you. Moving on to just sharing some of the best practices that we've seen from across the world on procurement it's dangerous to start on your cloud journey thinking about compliance and procurement. Right, your cloud journey must always start with the business drivers or the mission drivers that you have. The Australian Tax Office spoke at our summit earlier this year in Washington, DC, and they run tax time mission critical applications on AWS. And imagine if their procurement had to say something like, give me a fixed price as of last year. Every year, what they would be faced with is a completely outdated service catalog, and they lose all the benefits of the the price drops that we've had. Again, involving governance teams as early as possible. The business or the IT teams often, of course, already have strong reasons to move to cloud. But what's important is to have these support organizations that can really, if not anything else, slow down the procurement. Teams like policy, security, compliance, procurement. It's critical that we get them involved as early as possible, but drive it from a business or a mission outcome perspective. It's also important to know how you want to buy. In any case, whether it's direct, indirect, or a bulk tender construct, what's important is to choose a vehicle that will scale with your business requirements and not the other way around. You don't have to work around the way a procurement works. You need to drive what vehicles you choose so that it can scale with your requirements. Focusing on capabilities. Again, I think this is a very, very important lessons learned that we have seen. When procurements talk about things like, do you have blue cables in your data center? Do you have these lights blinking in your data center? It really takes away from all the fantastic capabilities that the cloud brings, right? So instead, if data security is something you're concerned about, you need to focus on what security capabilities. Does the cloud service provider provide you encryption? Do they have granular access management, identity access management, and so on and so forth? So it's always about focusing on the capabilities. The last one, of course, is, we spoke about this, is to correctly apportion responsibility. Again, it's critical to think about who you're buying from and what you are buying, and therefore apportion responsibility, liability. Going back to the utilities analogy, the fire you cost could be because either you didn't do the right thing, your electrician didn't do the wiring appropriately, etc. So where do you put that risk, accountability, liability? It's important to think about that. Going forward, I've spoken about some of the best practices. We chose the top 5, but there is more detailed cloud considerations white paper that's available on our website. I really encourage you to go take a look at that. It's very succinct and lays out the things that you should think about when you're thinking about going out to market for a procurement. The other thing I would say is, technical essentials is a course we run, usually taken by the technical people, but it's also has been very, very useful to send your policy procurement people to do a foundational course on technical essentials, AWS technical essentials. It gives them a great perspective of what's already available and what they should think about when they're writing procurement requirements. So that's important. And of course, anytime you think you need more deep dive procurement discussions, etc., we're always available to conduct awareness workshops. That's all I really had. So if you have questions, please find me after the session. Happy to have a chat on the sidelines. Thank you so much.